We're coming to you from Washington, D.C., where the IMF annual meeting is taking place. A very special guest here, India's Minister of Finance, Arun Jaitley. Thank you so much, sir, for speaking with NDTV. I have to begin with the outlook here because it seems I is the only one standing tall within BRICS. And even in the general atmosphere, India is telling a very different story from what IMF seems to espouse of slowing global growth, the risk of deleveraging, a risk of a complete debt problem.
Well, the IMF has already released its report and they've pegged the global growth for the year at 3.1%. And there's also a possibility of a downward revision. In fact, consistently in the last 2 years, downward revisions is the normal practice. Now, globally, the situation still appears to be extremely challenging. It's challenging because we are still through to a low commodity oil price regime. You have economies generally in a 1%, 2% at best growth rate. The Asian growth rates are actually, and the emerging markets are pulling the global economy up a little. Now, under these circumstances, I think India stands out for two factors. Major economies are going in through phases of protectionism. So you saw the Brexit happening, you saw the entire US presidential election debate, which is extremely becoming protectionist. India, on the contrary, has been over the last 2 to 3 years consistently taking step after step reforming. India's growth rate amongst major economies is the best in the world. And around India also, smaller economies, Bangladesh, etc., also seem to be doing all right. Now, the overall impact of this is, therefore, that we become noticed by all possible investors. And it's quite understandable, therefore, when they say that India is a bright spot or India is in a sweet spot. It's logical because everybody does well when the world is moving faster. But when the world has slowed down for India to move faster, then that's what makes you stand out. And that's obviously the reason why there's a little bit of a buzz about India.
Right, so we are bucking the global trend, clearly. But is there a fear of this rise of protectionism, which seems to be a key theme emerging here, especially if, say, a certain presidential candidate, Donald Trump, is elected? Will trade tariffs change? Will there be higher taxes on global trade, which will actually have negative repercussions for us?
Well, the tenor of the debate certainly is protectionist. But then we've seen in the past also protectionism as a center stage issue during elections because of concerns of domestic constituencies. But then the responsibility of office, once you are voted into power, compels you for a change. And therefore, my own experience is that what is said during the course of the elections in these matters is not exactly what is implemented in many economies in the world. And hopefully, irrespective of the results, I don't think governments will ever be so protectionist.
I know you just concluded a meeting with the US Treasury Secretary Jack Lew as well. Was that the same message?
Well, I can't tell you what we discussed in the course of the meeting, but this is the impression I consistently have over the last few elections. And that's not only in the United States, even in Europe you'll find the same. You see, there was an element of protectionism in the debate when the Brexit debate took place in the United Kingdom. And having succeeded in exiting, the government now is trying its best for the future to enter into broadening its trade with the rest of the world. So earlier they were doing it through the European Union, now they want to do it on their own. I've met British ministers also, and I find a fairly liberal approach post-Brexit.
Okay, that's interesting to know. The other big topic of conversation, and a lot of people have been speaking about the rise of geopolitical tensions which we witnessed in recent weeks, especially around the line of control with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. I know you have said the economic impact of surgical strike is very marginal, but the geopolitical risk of this blowing up with two nuclear states, at risk, what is that kind of economic repercussion which the world should factor?
I don't think we should overstate the problem. Emphasizing that the two countries are nuclear powers and therefore there is a nuclear blackmail involved is a Pakistani strategy. It's never been an Indian strategy. If you look at the economic impact of the surgical strikes, within minutes of the strikes you had an upheaval in the markets and the currency market. But over the next 2 to 3 sittings it settled down completely. I think India's strength lies in the fact that India has a huge amount of resilience. And therefore, after day one, life went on as usual. And defense will always remain a top priority as far as expenditure is concerned, because national security and sovereignty are paramount as far as India is concerned. But I don't see any long-term economic impact arising out of the strikes itself.
Will you be looking at increasing the defense budget?
Well, I think whatever is required for our armed forces will be provided for. As I said, that will be always a top priority as far as the government of India is concerned.
Right. In terms of, Pakistan's international isolation, we've seen a lot of that already take place in United Nations. In fact, most of the countries agree with India's message on terror. Do you feel that economically as well there is more to be done and we are proceeding on those lines?
Well, I think there are conventional steps India used to take. Now, the conventional steps have their own impact. They have their own symbolisms. But at the end of the day, it's for the government to decide, because even on the advice of various security agencies as to what the best action would be. And the government has taken a serious step forward in this matter, which is quite different from what used to happen in the past. Now, what else is required to be done, I am really in no position to discuss or disclose that at the moment. But I think the government will always keep its options open.
Right. It seems very clear that Pakistan is not losing just India's relationship, which has always been a problem spot. But it is also disassociating itself with other countries around itself. So if in Afghanistan, what we witnessed from Bangladesh, those countries are also changing towards us.
That fact that almost everybody said we won't attend the SAARC summit,
right,
speaks of their isolation in the region. Ultimately, if you use terrorism as an instrument of state policy, and every terrorist incident, a major terrorist incident anywhere in the world has a Pakistani footprint around it, then brand Pakistan really identifies itself with global terror. And therefore, all contrarian noises that they make, that Pakistan is a victim, etc., clearly has established that the world is not willing to listen to them because of a very low credibility and a low track record as far as these matters are concerned.
Right. India, obviously in a completely different league, but I believe Pakistan's finance minister is here also at the summit, attending it. Is there a chance of any possible interaction, or there will be no meeting?
Well, I'm not aware of the fact whether he's here or not.
Okay. Let's just move to the other broader aspects of the Indian economy. A big win has been the political consensus and the will which pushed through the GST. Everyone has lauded it, but are talking about the implementation and whether or not this will result in low taxes, to what extent. If the logistics costs are saved, will it lead to a growth of 1.5% in our overall GDP as well? What is your sense, sir?
Well, it could. And there's a good reason for it. You see, once we are able to implement the GST, the first impact would be that India becomes one uniform market. There'll be a seamless transfer of goods and services across the country. Therefore, time being wasted by trucks parked at every entry point of a state, and a huge amount of days being taken for goods to travel from one part of the country to the other, all that will be eliminated. Secondly, you won't have differential tax rates. You won't have multiple tax rates. That is, you will have purchase tax in Punjab, you will have an entry tax in some state, you will have an octroi in Mumbai. All these additional tax are add-on costs. All these will be eliminated. on tax already paid in one part of the country, you will get a credit as far as another part of the country is concerned. So there won't be tax on tax. So as far as the manufacturing activity is concerned, the quantum of taxes itself will go down. The GST, being a more efficient system, will check evasion. And the more evasion that we are able to check, the more reasonable will be the rate. And therefore, GST's ability on account of these cumulative factors to add to India's GDP is certainly there. Now, how much it adds is something to be seen.
But it could be 1 to 1.5%.
Well, that's what economists say, but I'll keep my fingers crossed. But it certainly is much better than the existing system. The existing system promotes inefficiencies. It promotes, it obstructs free trade. It prevents India from becoming one uniform common market. It charges you tax on tax. It causes delays. Investment to that extent is struck. And I think the inefficiencies result in a lot of evasion. Now, all these factors can collectively get checked by the GST itself.
Also, sir, at this point, it seems there's a vibrancy to India's reforms in the sense that we are looking at an easily more accommodative monetary policy with, at the same time, structural reforms taking place, supplemented by a strong fiscal push as well. Do you feel this is a new cycle where all these three tools work simultaneously for India?
And I think there is an underlying reason why. You ask me questions on Pakistan. I think the fundamental difference between India and Pakistan today is that we are a far more aspirational society. And therefore, it's not merely the middle classes in India which are aspirational. Those layers below the middle class also are just hungry to move up. It's a country with a positive agenda. Our neighbor, on the contrary, is surviving only on the strength of anti-India sentiment. And therefore, they are wasting their time, their energy, their resources entirely on that. I think today, as a result of all these positive factors, India is far more aspirational than it ever was. And different generations of Indians are far more aspirational. And that is probably the reason why the constituency in India which supports reforms today is much larger than the one which opposes it. This was earlier never the situation. So if you look at this calendar year, we started the year by passing the Aadhaar law. So subsidies can get rationalized. You had the monetary policy entire regime change. Now you have a monetary policy committee, you have a statutory targeting. We've spoken about this for 20 years, we've now implemented it. Then you had the bankruptcy law, the insolvency code unanimously passed by both houses of parliament. You had major steps on black money, from the Benami law to the IDS scheme. Again, the Benami law was passed unanimously by parliament. And I think the high point was not that the GST got passed, it got passed by a unanimous vote in both houses of parliament, which is all an indication of reforms today are not as difficult in India as they used to be earlier, because the constituency which supports reforms is much larger. And that's because India has a positive agenda and India has become far more aspirational.
And that's indeed a powerful message that the world wants to hear. Thank you so much, Minister Jaitley, for speaking with us.